This diagram maps human identity as a dual-layered architectural system, a dynamic inner core enclosed by a rigid, opaque outer boundary shell. This model was conceptualized by psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott, who divided human identity into two operating systems, the true self and the false self. The true self is the biological bedrock of identity. It is rooted in spontaneous, authentic experience and the raw sensory perception of simply being alive. Surrounding this core is the false self, a defensive facade. It is constructed during early childhood development to comply with external social expectations and to shield the vulnerable inner core from harm. This creates a paradox. The false self successfully protects the individual from exploitation or social rejection, but maintaining this rigid exterior requires constant psychological labor. It acts as an active, energy-consuming defense system. Over time, the relentless effort required to sustain this compliance sets the stage for systemic psychological and physiological failure. In modern cognitive behavioral psychology, the mechanisms we use to manage distress are categorized into a specific taxonomy of coping strategies. These strategies operate on two tracks. Adaptive coping confronts problems directly, facilitating growth. Maladaptive coping relies on avoidance, overcompensation, or mental escape for temporary relief. Within this framework, maintaining the false self is categorized as self-concealment. It is an extreme form of maladaptive avoidance, defined as the active predisposition to hide personal information that the individual perceives as negative or distressing. For marginalized groups navigating public environments, this self-concealment operates as a survival tactic to manage perceived societal stigma and prevent exploitation. While this strategy minimizes immediate social friction, relying on it ensures cumulative, long-term psychological damage. The active concealment of the true self creates a continuous metabolic drain. Modern digital architecture bypasses this defense mechanism, shifting the energetic requirements of maintaining a public facade. To understand this damage, we examine Pennebaker's inhibition model, mapping the thermodynamic system of the false self. Suppressing thoughts and authentic reactions requires continuous physiological labor. This energetic drain correlates with negative clinical outcomes, predictably leading to compromised immune function and physical symptoms. The physiological toll is compounded by a severe cognitive cost, Wegner's preoccupation model. Maintaining the false self requires deliberate thought suppression. This triggers an ironic rebound effect, creating a relentless internal feedback loop. Intrusive thoughts multiply, rapidly consuming self-regulatory resources and exhausting cognitive bandwidth. The psychological facade acts as a parasitic system. It actively degrades both the physiological and cognitive health of the host in exchange for social compliance. The intersection of these models produces a highly specific clinical state, the dual motive conflict. This maps the mechanics of the dual motive conflict. An outward biological urge to reveal the true self directly opposes a defensive urge to remain compliant. These vectors grind against each other constantly. This high-friction psychological state drives clinical anxiety and depression. In the physical world, this system rarely rests. Real-time sensory feedback, eye contact, subtle body language, and vocal tones forces the false self to remain vigilant. Historically, one of the few ways to temporarily relieve this pressure was through physical de-individuation, disappearing into the anonymity of a dense crowd. As long as physical presence and social visibility are required, the metabolic cost of the dual motive conflict remains inescapable. Digital environments introduce a direct structural bypass to everyday self-concealment protocols, entirely dissolving the rigid sphere of the false self. Psychopsychologists classify this phenomenon as the online disinhibition effect. By circumventing physical presence, the energetic and cognitive costs of maintaining behavioral inhibition drop to near zero. This technical schematic breaks down the specific structural variables of cyberspace triggering this effect. The most critical piece is dissociative anonymity. It severs online actions from offline consequences that govern the compliant false self. Coupled with invisibility, the lack of physical feedback disables behavioral inhibition entirely. Digital architecture unplugs the false self, removing the physiological friction of the dual motive conflict without altering underlying human nature. Bypassing the false self yields an immediate behavioral result, a sudden, massive release of previously suppressed psychological energy. This energy release splits into two distinct pathways. The first is benign disinhibition. Clinically, this manifests as the true self finally seeking actualization. Individuals work through repressed trauma, share intimate fears, and execute acts of profound compassion toward complete strangers. The second pathway is the darker inverse, toxic disinhibition. This manifests as a developmental regression. Primitive, repressed impulses and hostilities are acted out without the braking mechanism of physical consequences. Both benign altruism and toxic harassment stem from the identical psychological mechanism, the complete removal of the false self's behavioral inhibition. Cyberspace acts as a psychological X-ray. It reveals the heavy burden of the false self by showing exactly what happens when that weight is removed.